Good evening, everyone. So today, I'd like to share with you the stories of two people that have been very important to my life, and how amazingly they can also be very important to yours. So without further ado, let's start. So once upon a time, a young lady was leaving her work to go home. It was approximately 8 p.m. on that day, and she was wearing a very unique and large beige dress. She made her way into the parking lot of her office. It took her a while to find her keys, and when she finally did, she opened the door of her car, very slowly. For some reason, on that day, she felt really slow, but at the same time calm. Not giving much attention to that, she started driving, but at a velocity in which people would certainly look at the car and realize that that person did not like home. After approximately 3 minutes of driving, the woman reached the main street of the town, which would pretty much follow all the way for 20 minutes until she got home. And at the end of that street, there was a traffic light. But for a reason, when the lights turned green, the woman did not accelerate. She felt so exhausted that she literally just stood up there, watching the green light. And before she could even think of accelerating, she heard screams. When she looked in the direction where they came from, she saw two men which were running desperately down across the street. They were screaming and shouting, as if they were trying to warn someone from something. Curious, the woman decided to watch. She wasn't in a hurry after all. But without being able to understand anything that was going on, she decided to finally step on the gas. But milliseconds before she could actually do so, she saw the image of an enormous truck that had lost control right in front of her, until it hit the wall and destroyed itself. That was an accident and a half. The woman, completely in shock, noticed that the man, for not many meters, had saved their lives, and consequently saved her life as well, since she stopped to watch them. The woman felt scared to her brains when she noticed that she had escaped an accident which would have certainly been lethal. A tourist, which was nearby, watching everything, came running into her direction. He opened the door, hugged her, and said, "Look, I have absolutely no idea what stopped you from crossing, but wherever it is, it saved your life." The man was trembling, maybe even more than the woman herself. And when the authorities came in, the man left. But not before saying, "I don't know if you noticed, but you have been born once again." The woman, in tears, noticed that she had seen death right in front of her. I know that at first, this might seem like very confusing to all of you, but let me just tell the second story so you'll definitely understand where I'm trying to get. So it was Wednesday of an atopic week. The man didn't have to work due to a 3-day holiday there was in that week. So he decided it was the perfect time for a quick trip to his hometown, to visit friends and family. That hometown was approximately 700 kilometers away. So it would take him 9 hours driving by car. At first, the man tried to convince a friend of his to come together, and it worked. His friend agreed to come with him, but one night before traveling, that friend ended up canceling. So, when the day came, the man, completely alone, at 5 a.m., started his journey. On that day, it wasn't either too cold nor too warm, or at least for the standards of that city. And after 1 hour of driving, the man reached a very big bridge, which was built over a very large river, very important to the city. The bridge had approximately 800 meters of length, and as shown on screen, 2 very big arches on top of it. two important details to the story. Firstly, parallel to the road, there was a train track in which trains could pass by. And when they did, cars would stop to let them. And secondly, it had begun to rain, which meant that the road was slippery and cars were traveling at a fairly low velocity. When entering this bridge, the man also noticed that in both sides of it, there were small stone walls, and on top of them, metal fences. These were built in order to prevent cars from falling down. Quick spoiler, they did not work. The man was also going at a fairly high velocity. When trying to make his car go to the left, his left wheels ended up hitting the train track, slightly but hard enough to make it start skidding. The man, in desperation, trying to correct the movement, moved his car to the right. But since it was going so fast, instead, it started spinning brutally. And the man, without being able to take control, destroyed both the wall and fence and fell into the river, with the passenger side of the car pointing into the water. Moments after, the man, regaining consciousness, noticed that the passenger side window was closed, so luckily, water had not entered the car yet, and the impact was not as hard as it could have been. But the man also realized that the car, slowly but surely, was drowning into the bottom of the river. So he noticed that soon it would be too late for him to save himself. So he removed his seatbelt, opened the window, and started to swim. And when he got to the surface, he looked at both directions and saw that the closest shore to him was approximately 200 meters far away. So swimming was not an option. He wouldn't get there in time before drowning. So the man did the only thing he could. He started to float and hoped that someone, for some reason, had heard the impact and would come after him. By miracle, that's exactly what happened. Two fishermen, which were working nearby, heard the impact of the car and came to see what happened. They found the man, helped him get into the boat, and took him home so that he could rest. At first, the man didn't have enough time to think about what was happening. But after all, he realized that he was only alive by miracle of God. And yes, I recognize that for most of you, this is still very confusing because you don't know who these two people are. But let me just tell you, these two stories that I have just told you are the stories from when both my father, Fabio, and my mother, Rosario, were closest to death. But what is the point of all of this? Why have I, to begin with, told you stories here today? You see, last year, when I first had the idea for this TED Talk, I asked myself, how important are the decisions that we make every single day to our future? And at first, I didn't have a precise and solid answer. But after some time of reflection, I realized life is nothing else but a game in which every single tiny decision that you make is able to change its final outcome completely. For example, what would have happened if my mom was not as exhausted as she was on that day? Would she have been able to cross the street in safety? And what about my dad? What if his friend was with him? Would the window be open? Unfortunately, we'll never know. But one thing is for sure. The probabilities of both of them having met in Japan, the other side of the world, in August 1998, and being married 2 years later, was definitely very, very lower than it actually was. And also, the probabilities of me and my brother Paulo being born 2 and 5 years later were definitely very close to zero. So, recognizing all of this, I thought, every single one of us, regardless of our bad days, the trouble we get in, and the bad mood we have, should be grateful for being alive. Because even though calculating the exact probability of being born is almost impossible due to the amount of variables involved in the process, let's just take into account that, on average, 100 million sperms are sent into the female egg, but just one of them reaches it. And this sperm is me, or my parents, is my brother, and is every single one of you watching this TED Talk here today. So knowing all of this, I thought, since we're so lucky to be alive here today, why not live life at its fullest? Because as the band The Strokes said in one of their songs, you only live once. Thank you very much.